Joe Rogan and Dave Smith in this last podcast touched on something about the nature of Israel that I think is often misunderstood and overlooked. So I'm glad you're with me in this one. Let's get into it.
Kind of, because the whole thing, Joe, is that they're all, Israel was a European, construct. They were made by a bunch of Europeans who came over and created Israel. But then they have to claim that they're the true Semitic people.
Is it true that genetic testing is outlawed there?
I believe that is true. I believe that's true. I double check me on that, but I believe it's true.
We
that you need like permission from the government to go get DNA tests. And I believe.
Well, this is the problem with the term Semitic.
Mm-hmm.
Because if these are European Jewish people, this is not the exact same genetics.
That's right.
Genetic testing
heavily
is
regulated.
Heavily. Here, you can get it at Walgreens.
That's right. Yeah.
And focused on medical and reproductive purposes, with broad support for carrier screening and pre-implantation diagnosis. This creates a system where health-related genetic testing is robust and often publicly funded, but direct-to-consumer tests for ancestry or paternity are highly restricted. Now, why would you highly restrict anything like that? If you wanted if a human being has bodily autonomy and you want to find out where your ancestors came from, why wouldn't that be? What do you think?
Well, look, like the only real answer to this is that.
All right, so we will get into Dave's answer here in just a second, but I wanted to linger on that point of the genetics and the inheritance that maybe goes along with that. We're going to take that, we're going to sort of put it on the shelf for a second, and then we're going to go into the biblical explanation for what is going on in Israel, what's God's plan for Israel, and what's going on sort of geopolitically. How do we understand what's really going on? So here's Dave's response to Joe.
The Israel project, or the Zionist project, always relied on this kind of claim, which is a crazy claim in a way. It's like a supernatural property right claim,
right,
that that you have this, which if you go, there was that great documentary on the settlers in the West Bank, and they'll all tell you, to a man or to a woman, but they'll all explain to you, like in very plain English with a Hebrew accent, that God promised them all this land. And so God promised us all this land. So I don't know who these other people are here, but God didn't promise it to them, he promised it to us. And so that's kind of the claim, that we're the original people of this land, and so we have a right to come back here. Now, forget for a second the fact that nobody conceives of property rights in this fashion in any other way.
Right.
Nobody thinks I could come up with a DNA test and be like, oh, I've got some Ukrainian in here. All right, well, I'm going to march into Ukraine, knock on a door, and be like, this is actually my house because I was here 1,000 years ago. But
it's kind of crazy that you block evidence that's not really a good argument.
Well, let's just say, hypothetically, if, say, the truth is that the Jews of 2,000 years ago weren't actually kicked out of the land, but in fact they were forced to convert, and that actually those people who you're saying were never promised the land are actually the people who were promised the land and then converted to Islam, and in fact you're just some European who came in here way after that. That, I'm just saying, hypothetically, if that was the case, that would be something that maybe you would want to control the information of.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah, so isn't that wild? Isn't that what would be even more wild is that they actually converted to Christianity, and we're talking about even a more nuanced and more kind of crazy kaleidoscope of things going on. I want to take you to an article written by Jason Staples kind of on this. I will link his Substack here, but I want to read from it. I'm reading Jason Staples' book right now, and I might do kind of a first impressions. I've enjoyed the work that he's doing. He touches on this very subject. Again, not from a geopolitical standpoint necessarily, but from a biblical standpoint. What is the Bible saying? What has God revealed to us about what is going on? And he's talking about Matthew, and he's talking about the usage of the term, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He says the theme of land is very strong throughout Matthew, as is the theme of authority. Jesus and his parents initially replicate Israel's stay in Egypt before they're instructed to go to the land of Israel. Matthew 2:20, a pregnant phrase, since the land of Israel did not generally go by that name in the first century. This is archaizing language that calls to the biblical and covenantal connection to the land and the people. That's what Dave is touching on. He's sort of touching on it without sort of grasping the biblical side of the conversation. And he does what a lot of people do, which is to equate Jews with Israel, which is not exactly how the Bible uses that term. Judah is part of Israel, but Judah is not synonymous with Israel. It's part of a bigger picture of what God sees as Israel. When they return, they're unable to settle in Judah due to Archelaus, and instead settle in Galilee, a region historically associated with the northern kingdom and tribes of Israel. This is what Dave misses. Israel, the name Israel, becomes the northern kingdom. Judah is the southern kingdom after the united kingdom of Israel, all 12 tribes, split. They split it 10 in the north, 2 essentially in the south. You can throw Levi in that as well, Judah, Benjamin, Levi. So 2.5, we'll call it that. This region had been significantly depopulated by Assyrian deportations of Israelites centuries earlier and became ethnically mixed hinterland territory, ethnically mixed, connected to the coastal cities of whose names I will butcher for centuries. It is then colonized by Jews under the Hasmoneans in the late 2nd century BCE. And so Assyria conquers the northern tribes, deports some, intermixes with others. If one were looking for remnants of the former northern Israelites, this, along with Samaria, where the Samaritans claimed descent from Joseph tribes, would be exactly where to find them. This is the land not only associated with northern Israel, but specific territories associated with the first tribes taken into exile by Assyria. Now, Dave points out that maybe some of those people didn't leave, that they actually converted. I would say, yes, some definitely converted to Islam, but what about the others who converted to Christianity? And that is the story of the Bible. Well, some of them converted to Christianity, which I think creates a whole nother layer to this conversation that I'm sort of fascinated by. So what do you think about Jason Staples' article? What do you think about this? I think this is part of what makes the conversation somewhat difficult, is people misunderstand the history and the biblical account of what's going on, what God is doing in the nation, and why it's not really a problem to be genetically mixed. God's plan was always really to have Israel be a light to the Gentile nations, and then he's going to call his people Israel out of the Gentile nations. It only becomes a problem if you have an ethnocentric framework that you're working off of that would exclude non-Jews and exclude the Gentile people. That's not what the Bible is saying happens. That's not what God's plan is. So the region had been significantly depopulated by the Assyrian deportations of Israelites. Again, he's not talking about Jews, he's talking about the northern kingdom centuries earlier, and became ethnically mixed. Now, you remember they were talking about the genetic testing and why they want to limit genetic testing for the people who are inhabiting the modern nation that we call Israel, even though, biblically speaking, God's plan was always for Israel to be a light to the nations, and Joseph, one of the sons, and his 2 sons later get 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. I know it's sort of confusing, but Joseph, who gets a double portion and therefore 2 tribes, has a Gentile wife, and his children are mixed. They are Hebrew and Egyptian. Ephraim and Manasseh are a prototype or a foreshadowing of what God is going to do in the nations. And you can look throughout Isaiah. I did a full, let me see if I can, it's actually up here. I did a full video going through the 2 servants in Isaiah that I think would actually touch on this subject really well. But God calls Israel to be a light to the nations. And one of the things that I've always noted for people who are trying to decipher what's going on here is that if it's not a light to the Gentile nations, then it's not Israel. That's sort of one of the prerequisites. I think you can go back to chapter 41 of Isaiah, 41 or 42. But listen to this. Hear this, O house of Jacob, who are named Israel, remember, and who come forth from the loins of Judah. so that's Israel, and now we have Judah, who swear by the name of the Lord and invoke the God of Israel, but not in truth nor in righteousness, for they call themselves after the holy city. So we've zoomed in here, right? So it's Jacob, Israel, but now he's speaking specifically to Judah, or the Judaites, or the Judeans, or what we would call today the Jews. He's saying, who swear by the name of the Lord, who invoke the name of the God of Israel, but do not in truth nor in righteousness. So they're not doing this genuinely. They're saying, we're this people, but are you? For they call themselves after the holy city, Jerusalem. Dave pointed out that this is a Zionist project. So the holy city, Zion, they're calling themselves. Now, I don't actually know. Like, I don't really have a big dog in this fight, even as a Christian person. Again, I'm looking at the Bible going, wow, what is really going on here? But it seems like Isaiah 48 is saying there's going to be a time when Judah sort of invokes the name, who call on the city, who say, we're the true people. We're gonna take the land because it's our inheritance. But God is saying they do not do this in truth or in righteousness. So if you're not a light to the Gentiles, if you're being if you're excluding the Gentiles by becoming an ethno-religious state, then it's not Israel. You sort of fail the test at that stage. So here's what I actually do think. And I think that the modern Jews, and we can put this in quotes, sort of colonizing Israel today, should not hide their European ancestry. That's what Joe and Dave were talking about this before they go into sort of this biblical idea that God promised the land. And maybe we'll do a live stream on this. I'm kind of interested in some of this. But I don't think you should hide this because, again, God has always said, I'm going to call Israel out of the nations. So there's no reason to hide the European ancestry because God promised that he would call Israel out of the nations unless, so what's the reason? Unless you have an ethno-religion that excludes non-Jews and only uses the Bible as a pretext for your own ideology. I think that maybe touches on what is going on here. Now, I think to some degree, this is the old trap of you're going to fight dragons, but then sort of become dragons. I think that the abuser or the abused can often become the abuser and perpetuate a cycle of abuse. And again, this is a difficult sort of topic to navigate, and I think the normie version of this debate would be people who are sort of hypercritical of Israel and the Jews, and they see this as colonization of the land. They see this as, it's clearly war, which, I struggle with. But people who are hypercritical will go so far as to say there's genocide going on. Now, other people who are sympathetic to Israel will say, of course, Israel has a right to exist. Israel has a right to the land. And I will say, just for context, because I think people sometimes, again, they don't know where to put you if you don't land on either one of those sides. I'm not extreme on either side. I'm sort of in the middle, and I'm hopefully optimistic about God's plans for Israel. Now, I would say the modern state of Israel is failing the test. It's not a light to the Gentiles, as is clear. Now, if you serve, so who are they? Who are these people occupying this land? I think it's a mixed group of people. I think there's all kinds of things going on. And to sort of summarize this, I wonder, and you can tell me what you think if you're here at this point, if you've hung in there at this point in the video. I think that if you serve a different God, not the God of the Bible, not the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, not the God of Israel, and I mean capital I Israel, not lowercase I Israel, God's view of Israel, who is reflected in the true servant, who is, I think, the fulfillment of Israel, and I believe that person is Jesus, in case that wasn't clear. If you serve a different God, if you serve Mammon, then you are very interested in this land. It's a strategic area for trade. It's a geopolitical strategy. God knows this. That's why God put Abraham there. But not to ingratiate Abraham in power and money and wealth and all this other stuff, but to strategically position the offspring of Abraham to be lights to the nations. Now, what does Paul, later the apostle, and convert to Christianity? Again, maybe some of these people didn't leave the land, they just converted. Maybe not necessarily to Islam, but Paul is one of those who converted to Christianity. He will tell us that the descendants of Abraham are descendants according to the faith, not necessarily the bloodline, but the child of promise, right? Isaac is the child there. God promised the child to Abraham, but it's really the promise, not the genetic connection to the child or to Abraham that is important. It's a connection to the promise through faith that is powerful, that is a light, that is, I think, the only hope for reconciliation. Again, you can look at some of the other videos that I've done on this, but Ezekiel 37 is key. Romans 9 is key. Isaiah is clearly key. And I know that, I'm coming to this point in the video, and maybe I'll apologize because I wanted to just do a short video, and I'm realizing now, I'm like, to really do this justice, I think we need to just have a long form conversation on this. I'll leave this video as is for now and hope that it inspires some meaningful conversation. And again, if you're here at this stage in the video, thank you for being here. I do feel like I touched on a lot, but only in a surface level, and didn't give some of these topics enough time to go very deep, but it is what it is. Nobody's perfect, but thank you for being here with me, and I will catch you in the next one.